They cut me out of the will and called me unworthy. Years later, I signed the papers that gave me ownership of everything they built. I'm Sabrina, the daughter they tried to erase. But instead of fighting back with anger, I built something quietly, and I waited. Have you ever felt dismissed by your own family? What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. I thought it was a birthday card. Turns out it was an erasure. I found the envelope tucked between bills and coupon mailers, its texture oddly stiff, almost formal, like the handshake of someone you didn't quite trust. There was no return address, only my name printed in a typeface that felt too sharp, too precise. For a moment, I thought it might be a birthday card. 26 didn't seem worth the postage, but my mother had always liked appearances. I peeled the flap open and pulled out the contents. The words weren't handwritten. They were legal, rigid and bloodless. Not deemed a suitable successor. That line stopped me. My breath did something strange, half caught, like it wasn't sure whether to leave or return. I read the letter again, slower this time. I had been removed from the family will. Removed. Erased. It wasn't anger that came first. It was silent. Not the peaceful kind, but the hollow ringing kind, like after a slammed door or the moment the music cuts out mid-song. Rain tapped lightly against the window behind me, a soft, almost polite sound, the kind that might have soothed someone else. But I sat there, motionless, a cold cup of coffee near my right hand and a half-eaten bagel going stale on a chipped ceramic plate. It was almost funny. Almost. My parents had always said I was creative. That word followed me like a paper kite tied to my ankle. It danced when I succeeded in college, fluttered wildly when I quit my corporate internship, and finally dropped like a stone when I told them I didn't want to work for the company. I was creative, which was their polite way of saying, not serious. I was the child of contingency plans, never part of the blueprint. Lauren, my older sister, was the heir. She always had been. I'd just been there. The phrase from the letter echoed louder than it should have. Not deemed a suitable successor. It wasn't just a legal phrase. It was a verdict. I opened a dusty drawer in the kitchen and pulled out a faded blue folder labeled in ink. Someday. Inside were clippings, sketches, old receipts from coffees where ideas were scribbled on napkins. I placed the letter inside, careful not to crease it. From the same drawer, I pulled out a satin ribbon, pale yellow, fraying at the ends. It had once wrapped a birthday present, an actual one, years ago. A journal. I'd filled its pages with words they never read. That ribbon was one of the last things they'd given me with something resembling affection. I folded it into the folder too. The room felt smaller somehow. The walls had always been beige, but today they looked more like decisions left unmade. I stood, stretched, and walked to the sink. Washed the coffee cup. Threw away the bagel. When my phone buzzed, it startled me. A message from Aaron. Dinner still on? I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Aaron, my anchor in the fog. I typed, yes. Definitely. I need noise. Dinner was at a small place on East Boulevard, the kind with warm lighting and cracked leather booths. Aaron was already seated when I arrived, 2 glasses of wine waiting. She smiled without needing a reason, and I felt something shift in my chest. We talked about work, her new roommate, and my neighbor's endless construction projects. Normal things. She didn't bring up the letter. I hadn't told her. Not yet. I wanted to pretend, just for an hour, that the world hadn't tilted. Midway through the second glass, she leaned in, chin resting on her hand. You know, she said slowly, if you ever wanted to build something of your own, I blinked. I'd back you. Her words weren't dramatic. She didn't say them like a movie line, but they landed. Something flickered at the edge of my thoughts. Small, bright, and insistent. Maybe the erasure wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the start of a new draft. I sat back, the wine warm in my chest, the ribbon in my coat pocket, and for the first time that day, I felt the corner of my mouth lift. Not quite a smile, but close. After dinner, I walked home alone. The spring rain had stopped, but puddles still mirrored the lamplight, stretching and breaking with each careful step. Charlotte wasn't a big city, but tonight, it felt vast. Like every building had its own secret and I was only beginning to gather mine. The streets smelled of wet pavement and jasmine. A light breeze tugged at my coat. I imagined the ribbon in my pocket fluttering like a little flag, announcing my quiet rebellion. I hadn't told Erin about the letter, but maybe I didn't need to. Maybe what mattered more was that she saw me, not as a backup plan or a family misfit, but as someone with spark. Back in my apartment, I stood at the corkboard above my desk. Push-pinned were clippings from old tech expos, a postcard from Portland I'd never visited, and a cartoon from years ago with a caption I used to love. Great minds don't think alike. They disagree, respectfully. I'd put that up after a fight with Dad about value propositions. He'd laughed like I was speaking a foreign language. I moved the postcard aside and pinned the letter behind it, almost like it needed hiding, or protecting, or maybe both. Then I opened my laptop. Not for distraction, not for work emails. I opened a blank document, stared at the blinking cursor and typed one word. Someday. Just that. I closed the lid, brushed my fingers along the edge of the folder on the table and turned off the light. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Sometimes revenge doesn't come with fire. Sometimes it starts with a form and a PDF. The folder marked Someday hadn't moved from the corner of my desk since March, but I touched it daily, sometimes just brushing the edge with my fingers, like checking to make sure it was still there. One Friday afternoon in June, I opened it again, not with trembling hands or a bruised ego, but with a steady sort of calm. Inside were napkins scribbled with product ideas, a rough outline of a digital loyalty platform, and a half-finished logo Erin once doodled during a trivia night. I laid them out on the table like puzzle pieces. I wasn't chasing applause. I was building something that might outlast the silence. We named it Cedar Loop Technologies after the tree in my childhood backyard and the feeling that everything eventually came back around. Erin signed the first check, $10,000. It wasn't venture capital. It was a savings. "We'll figure it out," she'd said, sliding the check across the diner table. "Worst comes to worst, I move in with my mom." Our office wasn't much. A sliver of a room in a downtown co-working space with cracked vinyl tiles and a whiteboard stained with ghosts of pitches past. The ceiling fan made a ticking sound that no one could fix, and the coffee maker had two settings, bitter and scorched. But it was ours. We filled the walls with sticky notes and ambition. Every Monday smelled like takeout and possibility. Erin liked loud playlists and early mornings. I liked color-coded Trello boards and 2 a.m. breakthroughs. We argued, we laughed. Sometimes we cried. Quietly. Always after hours. One night, alone in my apartment, I stood in front of a photo shelf. One by one, I removed the framed memories. Lauren in her graduation cap, my parents at Yellowstone, the family Christmas card from 2007. I didn't throw them out, just placed them gently in a box, taped it shut, and labeled it Archive. It wasn't about erasing, it was about editing. I replaced the photos with quotes clipped from magazines. Start small, stay sharp. quiet doesn't mean weak. In the center, I pinned the cedar loop logo, a small green loop made of leaves, soft, almost forgettable, but persistent. By the fall, we had our first functioning prototype. I ran tests while Aaron pitched local businesses. Most said no. One said maybe. A week later, that maybe became a contract. A small stationery store with 3 employees and a dream of growing their customer base. We celebrated with instant noodles and a $6 bottle of Prosecco. The office smelled like printer toner and cheap soap, but the air felt electric. I stared at the signed invoice like it was a birth certificate. As I took my first sip, Erin leaned back in her chair, smirking. "We're gonna be a problem someday," she said, raising her plastic cup. "I can feel it." I didn't answer right away. I just smiled and clinked my cup against Erin's. There were no trumpets, no headlines, just the quiet hum of progress and a little tick from the ceiling fan overhead. And beneath it all, a growing certainty in my chest. This was no longer about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving myself right. Later that evening, I lingered in the office long after Erin left. The building had mostly emptied out, save for the distant clatter of someone microwaving leftovers. Outside, the streetlights cast amber halos on the sidewalk, and the city hummed with late-night movement. Delivery trucks, muffled conversations, the occasional bark of a dog. I walked over to the whiteboard and stared at the words we'd scribbled in blue marker: modular, intuitive, rewarding. Beside it, a diagram Erin had drawn looked like a messy constellation. I traced the lines with my eyes, then erased it all in one slow motion. Clean slates had power. I sat back down and opened my laptop. Not to tweak code or answer emails, but to draft a mission statement. Not for investors, just for myself. Cedar Loop exists because connection matters, because being seen matters, even when the world overlooks the quiet ones. I typed, deleted, retyped, settled on something imperfect but honest. Then I saved it under the folder now titled simply Active. Sometime past midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from Jason. "Doc drafts ready, want to review tomorrow?" I responded with a thumbs-up emoji. He was efficient, a little dry, but trustworthy. Exactly what we needed. As I gathered my things, I caught my reflection in the office window. The same eyes, same hair, pulled back in a practical knot. But something had shifted. There was steel now beneath the softness. On my way out, I passed by the corkboard in the common area. Other teams had tacked up photos. Launch days, pizza parties, inside jokes. I paused, pulled a pushpin from my bag, and tacked up Cedar Loop's logo. No words, just the loop. I didn't need to explain it. Not yet. But someday, they'd ask. You know what hurts more than being forgotten? Being rewritten. The magazine had been left on the shared coffee table in the break room, folded open to a page that must have caught someone's eye. I didn't mean to look. But there it was. My sister's name in bold serifed font. Lauren Bennett, next-gen business visionary. My gaze flicked across the glossy page. There was Lauren, smiling that practiced smile, all white teeth and tailored navy blazer, seated at the head of a conference table that looked suspiciously like our father's old boardroom. The headline boasted, "Innovation meets tradition," a phrase I had used 3 years ago in a pitch deck, now collecting dust on a forgotten drive. I placed the magazine back exactly as I found it, careful not to smudge the ink. The office was warmer now, full of life. Cedar Loop had outgrown our cramped co-working space. We leased the second floor of a brick building near the Greenway, with windows that actually opened and floors that didn't groan under every footstep. Plants lined the sills. Desks were mismatched but functional. On the wall near the entrance hung a corkboard, peppered with thank you notes from clients and doodles from team lunches. And still, I felt small. Later that week, at a cafe downtown, I met with a potential partner. The conversation turned unexpectedly nostalgic. "You know," the woman said, sipping her cold brew, "I once heard Lauren Bennett talk about emotional design in tech. So original, right?" I smiled tightly. "Yeah," I said. "Original." I didn't mention the time I'd used that exact phrase, emotional design, during a heated meeting at Bennett and Company, back when I still thought someone was listening. We hit our first $500,000 in revenue that quarter. No press release, no ribbon-cutting ceremony. Just a quiet dinner with the team, Thai takeout, and the satisfaction of payroll hitting on time. Erin raised her glass, sparkling water this time, and said, "To build without the noise." I just nodded. I liked the silence. One morning, Brenda from the operations team forwarded an email. "I remember when you pitched that thing in the break room," it said. "Back when Lauren cut you off. I'm glad you never stopped. Have you ever had your voice stolen, only to watch someone else praised for your words? That quiet sting of being erased, yet still standing? If you've ever felt overlooked by the people closest to you, leave a comment number 8 below. Now, let's keep going." I read the message, deleted it, restored it, deleted it again. It sat in my trash folder for 3 days before I finally archived it under a label marked dust. Not because it didn't matter, but because I wasn't sure what to do with the feeling. The email didn't ask for credit, just acknowledgement. And even that felt too heavy to carry. That Friday, Erin knocked on my office door with 2 paper cups of matcha. She set one down, then pulled a thick cream-colored envelope from her tote. "Networking gala," she said, voice light. "Thursday night, Charlotte Convention Center. They're honoring Bennett and Company." I didn't reach for the envelope. "Pass." "I figured," Erin said, sitting anyway. "But I had to ask. They'll all be there. Press, CEOs, the old board." I stirred my drink without sipping. "I'd rather go to the dentist." Erin laughed, but it didn't fill the room the way it used to. "It's not about them. It's about showing up. Letting people know we exist." "I exist just fine," I said, then softer, "in my own way." That night, I walked home through a light drizzle, my coat damp at the shoulders. I passed a bookstore and caught my own reflection in the window, hair messy, face bare, eyes not tired but faded. Lauren's face would be on banners inside places like this. I kept walking. Saturday morning, Erin forwarded an article from a finance blog. I opened it while brewing coffee. One slipper missing, hair in a lazy twist. The headline was unassuming. Bennett and Company. Faces cash flow issues, explores quiet sale. The corners of my mouth lifted almost involuntarily. I carried my mug to the balcony, stared at the street below, and watched a woman teach her golden retriever to wait at the curb. Then I walked back inside, opened my laptop, and opened the old family email thread I hadn't touched in years. The screen blinked. No messages. Just below, a tab pinged. Slack from Erin. "Just saw the article. Are you good?" I typed, deleted, then replied, "Are they?" They were. On Sunday, I cleaned my apartment. Not the kind of cleaning that came with urgency, but the kind that honored stillness. Scrubbing baseboards, rearranging spice jars, ironing tea towels. I found an old notebook under my bed with my name written in a child's cursive. Inside were lists of things I wanted to invent. A vending machine that made warm cookies, shoes that changed color in the rain, an app that could translate pet barks. I smiled. Not because it was silly, but because it reminded me who I'd always been. Back in the office Monday morning, I wore a navy blouse. Not unlike Lauren's magazine spread. No one noticed, but that wasn't the point. I opened my calendar, cleared my Thursday evening. I wasn't going to the gala, but I was no longer pretending not to care. Somewhere between silence and fire, there was planning. And I was good at that. When you build quietly, they never hear you coming. October had arrived like a sharpened pencil, clear, precise, and cool to the touch. The streets of downtown Charlotte were still littered with leaves that hadn't made up their minds about falling. In the quiet of Cedar Loop's main office, the hum of the HVAC and soft clacks of mechanical keyboards felt like the pulse of something alive, but patient. I sat across from Erin at our shared glass table, the light from the window catching the rim of her mug. She was talking about holiday campaigns, but my mind wasn't on December. It was on a number I had circled 3 times on a memo from Jason. The valuation of Bennett and Company. I didn't need to see the rest. I knew the story already. Revenue slipping, innovation stalled. Too many chiefs, not enough thinkers. My parents had built a legacy, but they'd pass the keys to someone who knew how to drive the car into the past, not the future. They reached out, Jason had said last week, his tone neutral. Through a broker, of course. No idea it's us. Not yet. The universe was either taunting me or handing me a script. I choose to read it. The due diligence process began quietly. Our team reviewed spreadsheets, organizational charts, and vendor contracts. Brenda, who'd joined Cedar Loop a year ago, walked into my office holding a folder. "I think you should see this," she said. Inside were drafts of a customer acquisition strategy I'd developed years ago. I remembered scribbling the original notes on a napkin during a layover in Chicago, only for it to be waved off by my father as premature. Now it was implemented, poorly, with no attribution, but still standing. I looked at Brenda. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Later that day, I stood by the window, arms folded, watching traffic crawl past the glass. Erin walked in without knocking. "You okay?" I nodded. "They're using my words, my systems, my blueprints, and now they want us to buy it all." She raised a brow. "That's a full circle kind of weird." "Feels less like a circle," I murmured. "More like a spiral." Jason stopped by just after lunch, his laptop tucked under one arm, a crisp folder in the other. He placed it gently on the table. "We're ready," he said. "Offer signed. It's moving forward unless you pull out." I stared at the folder for a beat too long. Jason didn't flinch. "Do you want to walk away?" I didn't hesitate. "No." Have you ever been asked if you want to walk away from something that once broke you, and instead, you chose to stay and reclaim your place? If you've ever had to decide between silence or showing up, drop a comment number 9 below. Let's see what happens next. I opened the folder, read every line, even the boilerplate. My name didn't appear. Just Cedar Loop. Just business. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from nerves, but from velocity. My brain was in motion, remembering things I hadn't thought of in years. The way Lauren once called me the dreamer, like it was a flaw. The way Mom looked embarrassed when I wore sneakers to a client dinner. The way Dad said, "Not everyone is cut out for legacy." Well, here we were. The next morning, I wore my quietest outfit. Gray slacks, crisp white shirt, hair back, neutral lipstick. I took the long way to the office, stopping by the flower shop around the corner to pick up eucalyptus stems. Brenda had a sinus cold, and she liked the smell. Midday, Jason brought in the final confirmation. "It's official. They're taking the offer." He said it softly, like announcing an engagement. I didn't smile, but I did reach for the folder, slid it into my drawer without looking at it again, and said, "Then I guess I'll need a dress." Erin looked up from her desk. For what? I tilted my head. The gala. They'll want to meet the new owner. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering a handful of leaves across the sidewalk like confetti that didn't know which way to fall. Later that evening, alone in my apartment, I lit a single candle on the kitchen counter. Not for the mood, just to mark the occasion. I sipped lukewarm tea and stared at the old someday folder still tucked between two cookbooks. I hadn't opened it in years, not since we launched Cedar Loop, not since the ramen and spreadsheets phase became payrolls and product roadmaps. But it was still there. I slid it out, dusted the corner. Inside was the original business plan, hand-drawn flowcharts, sticky notes with quotes like "build quietly" and "they won't see you coming." I smiled at one in particular. Don't chase legacy. Design it. Maybe I had. My phone buzzed. A message from Erin. You really going to the gala? I typed back. Yes. I think it's time they saw what invisible looks like in heels. I turned the lights off, letting the candle finish its flicker. Tomorrow, we'd send the transition team. But tonight, I allowed myself the rarest indulgence of all. Peace. Not the kind that comes from victory. The kind that comes from no longer needing anyone to clap. In a city that once felt too large to hold me, I had found space. And now, I was about to own the very place that once erased me. Not out of spite, out of design. They told me I didn't belong. Now the room has my name on the deed. November in Charlotte shimmered like a secret, cold enough for scarves, warm enough to leave the coat unbuttoned. The hotel ballroom glittered with uplighting and glasses clinking softly. Waiters moved like whispers, and name tags gleamed on lapels, except for mine. I stood near the entrance for a moment, unnoticed. I hadn't worn red, hadn't swept my hair into anything dramatic. Just a simple navy dress, sleeves to the wrist, heels that didn't click too loudly. Presence, not spectacle. Lauren was already on stage. Her voice filled the room, not loud, just polished, practiced, familiar. And that's what innovation means to us, to see what isn't yet visible, to build before the market demands it. My jaw didn't clench. Not anymore. I recognized the sentence. I'd written it years ago, scribbled during a conference I wasn't invited to attend. She must have seen it in one of my old notebooks. People applauded. Someone near me murmured, "She's brilliant." Another nodded, sipping Chardonnay. I didn't move. Brenda stood by the side wall, a calm anchor. Jason was closer to the stage, shifting papers at a podium tucked discreetly behind a velvet curtain. No one had noticed me, not even Mom and Dad, seated at a center table near the front, silver-haired and upright, plates untouched, legacy personified. Lauren wrapped up her speech with a glowing smile. We look forward to many new chapters. Thank you. Applause again. Not thunderous, polite, controlled. Jason stepped forward, smoothing his blazer. Before we conclude tonight's event, I'd like to make a small announcement on behalf of Cedar Loop Technologies. There was a flicker of curiosity in the air. Not suspicion yet, just a shift in posture, a few heads turning. Effective as of this week, Jason continued, Cedar Loop has finalized a majority acquisition of Bennett and Company. The clapping was scattered, a few sharp inhales. I took 3 steps forward. Just 3. Enough to move into the soft circle of light near the edge of the crowd. Faces turned. Eyes widened. Lauren's jaw paused mid-smile. Her hand, still on the podium, visibly tightened. Douglas blinked. Linda leaned toward him. Is that... I didn't smile. Not really. Just enough to let them know I saw them. Don't worry, I said, voice calm, measured. I didn't come to take anything. I'm just reclaiming what was always mine. No one moved. It didn't feel like a victory parade. It felt like alignment. Like the world had just snapped into place and stopped pretending otherwise. I turned, heels soft against the carpet, and headed toward the exit. On my way out, Brenda gave me the slightest nod. Aaron texted before I even reached the car. "Mike, drop." I didn't reply. Not yet. Outside, the wind had picked up. The valet brought my car around without comment. I slid into the seat, hands steady on the wheel. Behind me, the lights of the ballroom glowed like a distant planet. One I'd finally visited. And left. Tomorrow, there will be paperwork, press releases, internal emails. But tonight? Tonight, I had nothing left to prove, and everything, absolutely everything, to build from here. The road home curved past sleepy streets and lit storefronts, coffee shops closing, students laughing on stoops. The city hadn't changed much since 2015. Maybe I had. I rolled down the window a little. The night air was clean and unashamed. For a long time, I believed silence meant safety, that staying unseen protected me from the rejection I once knew too well. But silence wasn't safe. It was self-erasure. And tonight, I stepped back into the story. I didn't need applause or apologies. I didn't need to prove that I belonged in that room. Because now, the room belonged to me. At a stoplight, I opened a voice memo app and whispered into the dark. Phase 2. Start mapping the integration team next week. Not revenge, just the next blueprint. I drove on, fingers light on the steering wheel, the soft hum of the tires echoing a quiet truth. Sometimes the best kind of justice doesn't announce itself, it simply arrives and builds. Back at my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. On the fridge was a faded sticky note Aaron had once left. "You are not invisible." I hadn't thrown it away. I took it down now, not to discard it, but to place it in a small wooden box in my closet. Alongside the ribbon from my last birthday gift, the first cedar loop invoice, a printed copy of tonight's acquisition contract. Artifacts of a story that didn't need to be shouted, just remembered. The quiet ones build foundations. And now I was ready to raise the walls. They erased my name, so I wrote it where they couldn't touch it. The keys came in a plain envelope. No ceremony, no ribbon, just a label. Suite 4B, Executive Office. I held it in my hand a moment longer than I needed to, running my thumb over the edge. It felt light, but it carried years. The elevator ride to the top floor was quiet, just a soft ding with each passing level. When the doors opened, the space looked unchanged. Same glass walls, same taupe carpet, same slight hum of the HVAC. But everything had shifted, because now the sign on the door read, "Bennett and Company, a Cedar Loop company." I walked in alone. Aaron had offered to come, but I wanted the silence. I needed to feel it without anyone filtering it for me. I placed my bag down on the polished desk, my desk, and opened the blinds. Morning light spilled across the room, illuminating corners that once felt out of reach. Brenda appeared not long after with a cardboard box. "Files from your old corner," she said. "Figured you'd want to go through them." She placed it down and gave me a small smile before disappearing down the hall. Inside, I found the usual: ledgers, brochures, company stationery, and one photograph. A company team shot, years ago. Everyone beaming, except me. I was on the edge of the frame, half cropped out by some careless edit. Forgotten, even in pixels. I stared at it for a while. Then I reached for a frame from the supply closet and slid the photo inside. Underneath, I scribbled a note on the label strip. "Still here." That afternoon, a letter arrived. Cream-colored paper, my mother's handwriting on the envelope, though the return address was typed. Inside, a brief note. We heard about the transition. We hope you'll find peace with the choices you've made. Linda and Douglas. No apology, just symmetry. Their letter had started it all. This one simply closed the loop. I didn't write back. Instead, I opened LinkedIn. Updated my headline. Owner, Bennett and Company. Founder, Cedar Loop Technologies. That was it. Just the facts. I closed the tab and made myself a cup of tea in the break room, the same room where years ago I once pitched an idea no one listened to. A young intern I hadn't met before stepped in. She paused when she saw me. You're the Cedar Loop founder, right? She asked, holding a paper cup. I smiled. That's me. She nodded, then went back to stirring her coffee. No fanfare. Just recognition, the kind that didn't need applause. That night, Aaron texted me. You chose right on time. I replied, I wasn't late. I just stopped asking to be seen. I stayed late that evening, not because I had to, but because I wanted to take it in. Every detail, every corner of this space I once felt unworthy to enter. I moved slowly, tracing the edge of the windowsill, watching the lights from the city below flicker on one by one. A different kind of skyline than when I started. Back then, every window felt closed. Now, it all felt open. On the wall near the back of the office, I pinned a small corkboard. Nothing grand, just a place to keep things that mattered. A sticky note Aaron wrote me once. Nobody has to believe in you first. Just go. A napkin sketch from the first Cedar Loop logo. And the ribbon from that birthday gift. The one I saved, before they stopped sending anything. That corkboard, more than any plaque or certificate, felt like a declaration. I didn't need their version of legitimacy anymore. I'd created something real. With paper and silence, with nights they never saw. Brenda stopped by again before heading out. She paused, looking around. It feels lighter in here, she said. Maybe it's the missing ghosts, I offered. She laughed, then caught herself. You did good, Sabrina. I know, I said. And for the first time, I really meant it. Later that week, I was asked to speak on a panel, Women in Tech Leadership. I declined. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I finally understood that proof didn't require an audience. My life was no longer about earning back a seat at their table. I had built a different table, one they'd never thought to make room at. And in that quiet, steady resolve, I finally felt seen. A few days later, I stopped by the old records room. It still smelled like dust and old toner. I ran my fingers along the spines of the archived binders, some of which I'd compiled years ago, meticulously, invisibly. No names credited, just results. I picked one up, flipped through it. The ink was fading, but the structure held. I smiled, then tucked it back into its slot. Proof of life doesn't always look like a parade. Sometimes it's a binder no one opens but you. Sometimes it's a breath. Before leaving, I slipped a small note behind the last binder on the shelf. History remembers what it can't erase. Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, stepped into the winter air. No noise, no spotlight. Just the sound of my own footsteps. Steady, rooted, enough. Some things don't need applause to be proven worthy. I didn't move forward to seek fairness. I moved forward to define myself on my own terms. In life, not everyone chooses silence as a response, but sometimes quiet persistence speaks louder than anything else. When we hold on to kindness and patience, even the doors that once shut us out can find a way to open. If this story touched a memory or stirred something within you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Because maybe, just maybe, what we write today can be a quiet light for someone still walking in the dark.